I want to start with you, Tim. The RBA has cut rates for the second time in a row. Doesn't this demonstrate that the economy needs stimulus, and perhaps it's worth looking at Labor's proposal for accelerating the second phase of those tax cuts?
Well, the clear decision that we need to do is make sure that we're stewarding the economy so that it creates growth and opportunity and jobs for Australians. That's why the sort of stimulus we're actually putting forward and we want to deliver is a tax cuts, but we want to do it in a responsible and balanced and measured way to make sure that we can deliver tax cuts so we can put more money in Australians' hip pockets. And the only barrier that's between us delivering that is the Labor Party at the moment, who are not being supportive of the package and not putting it through the Parliament. We can get this done today. And that's our objective, is to get it done as quickly as possible so that Australians can have up to $1,080 per person for low and middle income earners in their hip pockets as soon as possible in this financial year when they file their tax returns.
Ed Husic, why doesn't Labor just do it today? I know you make an argument about all of this, but really at the end of the day, it needs to happen. The RBA even says so. Why not facilitate it getting through the Parliament?
The RBA's cut interest rates to a record low. They don't do that because they think the economy's bouncing along pretty nicely. They're doing it because they're concerned clearly about where things are headed. And when the government talks about putting money in people's pockets, they're not talking about putting it in today. They're talking about putting it in way down the track. What we're saying is bring forward stages 1 and 2 of those tax cuts so that Australian workers get that increase or that benefit right now. The economy gets the benefit right now, instead of us talking about tax relief that's going to happen well down the track. That's what we need to see happen right now. This economy is floundering. Productivity has been going backwards for the last few quarters. Wages are stagnant. Underemployment is high. And this is at a time where unemployment is low. So clearly the economic circumstances would warrant us taking action now instead of talking about action that's going to be taken down the track.
Well, on that, Tim Wilson, you're the government. This is your promise. You've got to facilitate a way for it to getting it through the Parliament. Are you prepared to do anything, including potentially splitting your bill and, of course, trying to legislate it later, as we'd expect you to, just to ensure that taxpayers get this in their pocket immediately?
Well, what we took to the last election, Patricia, was a balanced package which weighed up the different considerations of making sure we drove stimulus and economic and growth and the creation of jobs. And this is the package we took to the election.
Sure, but we now have new economic news. That's the question.
Hang on, Patricia, this is actually about honouring the trust we had with the Australian people. We took a package to the election. We said, this is what we're going to do if we're going to get elected. We got elected. We're now seeking to implement it practically as part of the government's agenda. We just had a half-an-hour speech from the Governor-General outlining the full comprehensive package of what this government is seeking to do, which it took to the Australian people. And we're asking the Labor Party to respect the will of the Australian people and to support the legislation, the package we took to the election, because we want to honour that trust. And now we want to make sure that there's tax relief in the hip pockets of millions of Australians to make sure that there is an investment and a stimulus inside the economy now, today, in the financial year that's just ended, when people complete their tax returns, because those are the sorts of things that are going to drive growth and job opportunities for Australians. Tim
Wilson, you're a backbencher. You can be pretty frank. Do you think more stimulus may be needed and it should be at least on the table as an option?
Well, I watch measures as they come along, but the reality is I'm not a big fan of just spending money, whereas making sure that people can keep more money in their hip pockets, which is what tax relief and tax cuts are designed to do, where we're ensuring that lower and middle income earners will have up to $1,080 in their hip pocket straight away.
Sure, accelerated tax cuts then? Accelerated tax cuts? Well,
no, as I said, we've taken a package to the Australian people and we should be honouring that. But we actually have a plan right now that's designed to give money people right now, or allow them to keep more of their own money right now. The barrier to that is the Labor Party, and we just hope that they will support this package, let it go through the Parliament so that we can honour the trust we have with the Australian people.
What the government took is basically a package of headlines. You know, they're not, you know, you've got the RBA today has cut interest rates to a record low. It's clear the economy needs that injection right now. The government could do this right now. They don't want to. Reason? Vanity. What they're more interested in is a headline that says they got to surplus. They're not interested about ensuring that the economy gets that injection that's needed right now. What they want is they want a headline that talks about a surplus. They want a headline that talks about some tax cut that's going to come sometime down the track. And they don't want to make the right decisions that are for right now. And this is the big thing. If they wanted to, they could make this decision right now. All they want to do is look macho, do the bravado act, not do what's needed for the economy, and that is not a government that is acting in the best interests of the country or the economy.
And Patricia, you've just heard there right now what Labor's proposing, which is they don't care about the budget surplus.
There you go.
They don't care about any sense of fiscal prudence. They don't care about making sure we hand over to future generations a country that's sustainable and has an economy that can support people for options growth. Absolutely, we're interested in making sure we deliver a surplus. We took that to the election as well. We went on that trust too. We are taking a balanced, proportionate, measured program which delivers, makes Australians keep more money in their hip pockets. We make sure we take care of the national finances and we deliver for the future growth of Australia. And if Labor doesn't think that's a good idea, well, maybe that's perhaps why they're on the opposition benches.
We think it's a good idea to make sure the economy's working now instead of getting a headline.
Well, let's pause it and let's see how this goes for the rest of the week, because lots will happen. Tim Wilson, I have a question for you. You collaborated with Wilson Asset Management to campaign against Labor's franking credit policy. That firm has now been forced to destroy all personal information it collected when people signed up on that petition. Do you accept you did something inappropriate by getting people to share that kind of personal information?
I don't agree with that, but, there's obviously been a decision that's been made and they took that undertaking to resolve the matter. I fully respect the fact that it's resolved the matter. But again, considering the hysterical and ridiculous allegations that were thrown at the Labor Party, they said that we'd breached laws. We hadn't breached laws around privacy information. They then made allegations that I should be investigated by the Australian Federal Police. The Australian Federal Police laughed at the allegations, didn't even bother to open a file. Then you had them demanding the Speaker investigate them, and the Speaker came back and said there were no rules broken.
Well, no, the House of Representatives Speaker, I need to correct that, Tony Smith, found in February that your use of the website to solicit submissions for the inquiry that you chaired could have the potential for political interference and cause damage to the committee's reputation.
That's the problem, is that it's misinterpreted and misled. I mean, what he said was that I was unorthodox, and that's definitely true, because what we actually did was we actively went out. I was a very active committee chair who actually went out and said, if you're affected by this issue, why don't you make a submission? Why don't you come through? Now, ultimately, of course, Labor tried to shut down that inquiry, making baseless allegations all over the shop because they knew that it had a huge political effect on them. I'm incredibly proud of what we did on that committee. Right. I'm incredibly proud that we made sure that we held Labor to account for its policies. Okay. I'm incredibly proud of the contribution it made to the election result.
You were sworn in today using a Quran belonging to one of the survivors of the Christchurch massacre. How did this come about and why is this important to you?
When I saw his story in March as to what happened to his wife during the events that occurred there, the fact that she had tried to save other people and then went back into the Al Noor Mosque to find her husband who's wheelchair bound and to save him and lost her life, had a big impact. Not as much as, and that impact is huge, but then to see his response after that, urging forgiveness and urging communities to stick together. I mean, you could see straight away this is an incredible human being, a very important one, and I was, honoured to be able to spend some time with him when I visited Christchurch last week to meet with him, and I asked him for permission to use his Quran today for my parliamentary oath. It is something else to see people in that position who you would anticipate would be feeling a range of emotions, be able to overcome that and say and prioritise the need for community cohesion. And it's someone I was proud to associate myself with for the purposes of another moment in time, which is our swearing in.
And Tim Wilson, you took your affirmation today while holding a copy of Milton Friedman's Capitalism and Freedom, which, of course, is, a bit of an unorthodox way to do it. Why did you choose this book?
Well, before I answer that, Patricia, I just want to say how beautiful that moment was, I think, with Ed, and I think as much, perhaps he couldn't say it, but somebody like I can, which is by doing that, you've also given the opportunity to talk about the story and to enlarge and inform other people. And so I think it's a great act and one that should be respected and recognised. I just took a book because I'm not a person of faith. I took an affirmation rather than the oath, and I wanted to show that, you know, just because you're not religious doesn't mean you don't have ideas, commitment to ideas, and you can be motivated by other principles. And I am somebody who believes in freedom, as we know, somebody who believes in capitalism, and I thought that book signified and made a statement, and maybe it's a new tradition that other people might like to take up as well.
Well, while we're talking about religion, your lack of, and the Quran, so we're on a theme, if I can sort of do a clunky segue, into religious freedoms or a Religious Discrimination Act. Tim, the Prime Minister says he's going to consult, and of course there's a big consultation process. Should these laws actually cover someone like Israel Folau to be able to do what he wants to do so that employers can't sack people in those circumstances?
Well, the Prime Minister's outlined a plan for consulting the parliamentarians as discussion around the introduction of Religious Discrimination Act, one that, at least on principle, I think Labor supports as well. And I don't think it's a law that should be designed to protect Israel Folau. I think it should be a law that protects every Australian. And that's why consultation is so critical, because it's actually about balancing the rights and freedoms of everybody. I mean, my personal view is it's very difficult to deal with the Folau issue in terms of legislation. What we really need to do is make sure that in the same way you can't be discriminated against in the workplace or for housing or other social services on the basis of disability or gender or sexual orientation, the same basic protection should exist for people on the basis of faith. But getting the technicalities in the laws are going to be complex because it's not straightforward. The Parliament's actually considered this before and said this isn't a too hard basket at the minute. We're confronting the too hard basket to make sure that we respect the rights and freedoms of everybody.
How about you, Ed? Do you have concerns around the way this Israel Folau issue has played out?
Well, I think we need to separate out the two things. I mean, your starting question was in relation to what the Parliament might do in respect of religious freedom, and clearly that is going to take... we do need to be sensitive about that. We want people to be able to speak freely, but we don't want people to also be discriminated against on a basis of, as we've already discussed, in terms of gender or race or sexual orientation. And so we do, and I would hope that we're able to have that discussion down the track. Given the difficulty of the issues involved, I hope we do this in a civil and thoughtful way to be able to get to a resolution that, you know, people across all sides of this debate want to be able to see an outcome. In terms of the Folau matter, it's very difficult because you've got the intersection here of contract or employment law versus a broader issue as well in terms of religious freedom and people's ability to speak and say what they want. You know, people are, you know, placing a lot of stock in terms of what happened with Israel Folau, and you know, I've also had you know, schools, particularly faith-based schools, come to me saying that they don't want necessarily someone to be able to come in to a school under the employment of that school and espouse views that are running contrary to the very foundations of the operation of that school as well. So it is an issue that does require some thought, some sensitivity, and again, importantly, I think through the course of this, civility. We do not need the toxic politicisation of an issue that is as big as this one.
But on this, Ed Husic, I spoke to one of your colleagues, Stephen Jones, and
yes.
he said this is multiculturalism. This is what it looks like. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I saw that interview, and I actually reached out to Stephen afterwards, and I thought it was a very thoughtful contribution. I think you have to realise that there will be people from different backgrounds that hold various views that have made their home in Australia, and what we are trying to do is obviously work as one and give people a space to live, but there will be instances where people will say things that other people will be uncomfortable with. But the great thing about Australia is we've managed to sort a way through this, and I'm confident we will into the future. But again, you know, I want to, in saying, you know, and one of the things I believe strongly in is being able to give, regardless of the background of the person, the ability for them to live their lives in the space that they call their own, and to feel free to be able to do so, but to do it in a way that we're not, majorities making decisions about the impact or decisions that impact on the lives of minorities, we have to be very careful about. So that's why I'm saying we need to pick our way through this carefully.
Tim Wilson, what did you make of that comment that this is the face of multicultural Australia?
Well, I think it reflects an honesty. You can't have a society based on diversity and then not have diversity of opinion and diversity of values. And so the basis in which I think the law or the expectation we should have on Australians, and I think ultimately should be instilled in law, is a basic respect for people's basic dignity and humanity. But we're always going to have different opinions about how we should live. We do in politics, and that can occur in other places. But with all issues around free speech, it all comes down to context, and there's a difference between what happens in the explicit environment of a workplace versus public statements around general matters of principle versus what perhaps happens inside of a church. And I think getting those principles and the tensions that exist is going to be critical to getting a law that everyone
So you do think
can live.
employers should have rights then to sack workers that don't comply with ideas that they share? Because you've previously said that in other cases. Do you think that with Israel Folau as well?
Well, so the broad principle, yes. I mean, I think employers should have the right to create environments where people are entitled to be sacked for going against the organisation depending on its values and lots of different objectives. And this is part of what we're trying to figure out. I don't think that Greenpeace should be compelled to keep somebody who, by day says save whales and by night's go out and harpoon them. As obviously it's an extreme example, but these are the tensions you need to balance and address in law. The extent to which you have religious organisations formed for a religious purpose and they expect people to broadly comply with them. That's why we're going through a sensible, comprehensive consultation process to bring people in, and I would hope to get a piece of legislation that brings the country together, because it's actually focused on respecting the rights and freedoms of everybody, not just focused on one narrow case, because the reality is individual cases rarely provide a good basis of law. Two-sentence
answer to both of you. Is it ethical that two former cabinet ministers took up roles with consultancy groups that effectively mean that they're relying on their previous roles? I'll start with you, Ed Husic.
I don't think it's right. I think it needs to be looked at, and I think it basically is making a sham of the ministerial code of conduct.
What do you make of that, Tim Wilson? Well, there are rules that deal with these things, and ultimately these rules will be appropriately tested. But I've got to be. I always find it difficult when you have parliamentarians who are being bound by what they can do after their employment. That's my general view.
Okay.
He went longer than me.
He did go longer than you. All right, I'm going to have to park it there because I've run out of time. But I don't know. This could be an audition tape for a future show for you two, just next to each other, chewing the fat.
Well, on another network, that Pie and Miles show has disappeared, so now it might be Wilson Husic. Or the ABC commissioners.
I love how he puts himself first.
He did.
Maybe it'd be Husic Wilson.
Look, multicultural Australia. Let's start with Husic. Oh, controversial topic. Don't go there. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Liberal MP Tim Wilson and Labor MP Ed Husic, or Labor MP Ed Husic, Liberal MP Tim Wilson. I'm not actually going to make a judgment there.